One Judge Andrew Napolitano here for Judging Freedom. Today is Thursday, January 18th, 2024. Scott Ritter joins us from Moscow, along with Alexander Zyryanov and Pavel Azhov, our able and wonderful translator. Scott, always a pleasure, my dear man. Thank you very much for joining us. Thank you for taking time. Alexander and Pavel, thank you as well. Scott, since we last spoke, you have visited the Crimea and you have visited the Donbass. How did you get there? What did you see? What were your impressions?
Well, we drove. Alexander and his good friend Dennis drove me. It's a very, very long drive from Moscow to Rostov-on-Don, which is the gateway to the new territories, to Crimea. And we went into Crimea first, crossed the Crimea Bridge, and there we had to wait to get permission to go into the new territories. It's more than just the Donbass. It's Kherson and Zaporizhia, and then you get up to Donetsk and Lugansk. I think the Russian Ministry of Defense was nervous. I think they like me and they didn't want me to anything bad to happen. So they were very nervous about letting me in. But because of Alexander's persistence, we were able to go in. I had a very good conversation with the governor of Crimea about his perspective on why Crimea is Russian, not Ukrainian, and why it will always be Russian. And I had a similar conversation with the governor of Kherson, talking about, what happened in 2014, the coup that took place in Kiev, what the consequences were for the Russian-speaking population, why they opposed the Zelensky regime, the Poroshenko regime prior to that, and why they supported the Russian intervention, and why they are proud to be part of Russia today. And that's the important thing. Not just in Kherson, but in Zaporizhia and Donetsk and Lugansk. Everybody I met, the United States isn't recognizing Crimea or these four new territories as being part of Russia. And I imagine that it will be a very long time if they ever will. But it doesn't matter. When you look in the eyes of the Russian people who live there, of the Russian people who are struggling, they know they're Russian. They're proud to be Russian. They believe they belong to Russia. They will always be Russian. And that's a reality that I think the United States needs to come to grips with. We're so proud of self-determination. We're Americans who say, we have a right for this, or we have a right. The Russians have a right to be Russian. And they want to be Russian. They don't want to be under the Ukrainian government, this Banderist regime that has sought to nullify Russian culture, sought to, commit cultural genocide. I was in Mariupol, this city that was devastated by the Nazis, by the Azov battalion, by the fighting that took place. And I saw firsthand not only the destruction of the city, but the rebuilding of the city, the rebirth of the city, how the Russian government has come in and they've built a new hospital. They've built new apartments. They're refurbishing damaged buildings. They're going to bring this town back to life. And it's more than just buildings, Judge. The streets are populated with women and children who had to flee Mariupol because the Nazis were trying to kill them, murder, and they murdered many of them, thousands of them. But they're coming back. They're returning to their homes, and their life is returning to normal. You can read about artillery fire, Judge. You can read the articles about the boom of artillery. Wake up in the morning in Donetsk and hear it yourself, and then look around and see the women, the mothers with their children walking the streets. They don't wear helmets. They don't wear body armor. They're living their lives. These are some of the bravest people I've ever met, and they're steadfast that they are Russia and they will always be Russia. I saw this in Lugansk. They took me to, the Alley of Angels, a memorial to the 68 dead children who were killed again by the Nazis, by artillery fire. Anybody who thinks that Ukraine will reconquer these territories, you need to go there. And that's why I went there. You have to see this firsthand. You have to meet these people firsthand. You have to look in their eyes. There's that old Revolutionary War thing, wait until you see the white of their eyes. Well, I saw the white of their eyes. I stared at them. I got to meet them. I shook their hands. I felt the firmness of the grip and the steadfast nature of these people. And you can't experience that long distance. You had to go there and see it. And so I'm eternally grateful for Alexander Zyryanov to put his own life at risk. He and Dennis, they're men with families. They're men with aspirations. They're not military men, but they went there because they felt it was necessary for me to see that. And just so everybody knows, Alexander and Dennis also make frequent trips there to provide humanitarian assistance to the people like thousands of other Russians do.
Alexander, my friend, welcome back to the show. It must seem that the Russian people are very grateful that the danger is gone and the parts of the earth that have been Russian culturally are now Russian legal.
Александр, дорогой друг, приветствую вас. Такой вопрос. Можно ли сказать, что российские люди благодарны за то, что сейчас опасность уже вдалеке, и что эта территория, которая была всегда российской в культурном смысле, теперь стала российской в смысле правовом?
Добрый день, судья. Я рад приветствовать вас и ваших зрителей.
Good afternoon, Judge. I'm very happy to welcome to be with you again, and good afternoon to your viewers.
Да, конечно, эти территории становятся и правыми в плане применения российских законов, но опасность не миновала. Тот же Донецк, Скотт, свидетель, мы стояли и слышали разрывы рядом.
Yes, these territories are becoming Russian legally as well, and they are now the territories that are governed by the Russian law. But the danger is not gone yet, and Scott was the witness of that. We stood there and we heard the explosions.
Я хотел бы, чтобы ваши зрители, жители Лондона, Нью-Йорка, Парижа, Берлина и других европейских городов просто представили, каково это в мирном городе, который бомбят уже 10 лет. Когда, например, семья утром, муж провожает жену на работу, детей в школу, и никто из них не знает, увидятся ли они вечером, кто из них вернется живой домой. Это происходит 10 лет каждый день.
I just want your listeners to appreciate the people from London, New York, Paris, Berlin, to think what it's like to live in a city that is being bombed by for decades already. When a family parts in the morning, the husband goes to his job, and the family doesn't know if they will be able to reconvene this evening. That's a horrible situation to live in.
So it's fair to say that the Donbass is not out of the woods yet, that the Ukrainian government is continuing to bomb and attack what it claims is part of Ukraine.
То есть правильно ли считать, что Донбасс до сих пор в нем сохраняется опасность, что украинское правительство продолжает бомбить эти территории, которые они считают по-прежнему принадлежат их государству?
Да, эти территории подвергаются обстрелам каждый день, в том числе и другие территории России, такие как Воронежская область, Белгородская область, совершенно по мирным жителям. Бьется не избирательно, не целясь, просто гибнут мирные жители.
Yes, these territories are still shelled on a daily basis, and not just these, but also the territories such as Voronezh or Belgorod, which experience non-selective fire. And what the Ukrainians do, they just are targeting civilians.
И я только сегодня прочитал новость абсолютно безумную, когда Макрон предложил поставить Украине более дальнобойное оружие, чтобы атаковать Крым и вглубь территории России.
And I read an outrageous news early this morning when President Macron suggested to supply longer range missiles to Ukraine so that they could strike Crimea and other territories.
И это необходимо остановить, в том числе и вот ваша передача для этого, я считаю, предназначена объяснить людям, что этого нельзя допустить, потому что мы терпеливый народ, у нас очень терпеливый президент Владимир Владимирович Путин, но в конце концов терпение у нас может закончиться.
And this must be stopped. And I guess I want to use this opportunity to communicate this at your show, that this shouldn't continue. We as a nation are very patient, and our president, Vladimir Putin, is also a very patient person. But sometimes patience comes to an end.
Понимают ли вот эти вот просто Безумные руководители западных стран, политики, военные, которые делают подобные заявления. Ведь они могут привести к началу Третьей мировой войны. И тогда не только российские города окажутся под обстрелом. Понимают ли жители этих стран, что они играют с огнем? Их руководство этих стран играет с огнем.
I wonder if those politicians and military people understand by making these reckless statements that they are playing with fire, because they're bringing on the verge of World War III. And if it happens, it wouldn't be just Russian cities that would be under fire.
Scott, how precarious is Western Ukraine? Obviously, President Macron's statement was reckless. Obviously, Joe Biden is still trying to negotiate for $68 billion in American aid for Ukraine military out of the Republicans in the House. That's reckless and crazy. But how dangerous was it where you were? And, you know, isn't the Ukraine military on its last legs?
Well, first of all, I don't want to exaggerate the danger I was in. The Alexander and the Russian government are very careful to keep me away from the front lines. I'm 62 years old. I'm not a war tourist, and you know, my job wasn't to go into the trenches. They did the photograph you're showing there. They did provide a bodyguard detachment because I, of course, am on the Miratorets hit list, and the Ukrainians have marked me for assassination.
Let me just stop you for a second while that's up there. Pavel, what does that mean in the background? What do those numbers and letters mean in English behind Scott and Alexander?
This says Komsomolskaya Pravda Radio.
No, on the TV.
This reads Luhansk, the hero city, and 1795, I presume, is the year when it was founded.
Okay, thank you.
Yeah,
please continue. Thank you for that, Pavel. We guessed that that's what 1795 meant. Obviously, we didn't know what the Russian meant. Please continue, Scott. How stable are Crimea and Donetsk and those territories, and how fragile is the Ukrainian military?
Well, the stability of the areas that are controlled by the Russian government, it's very stable. You know, the Russians, as they advance, behind them comes the Russian government that begins infrastructure develop. I have to tell you, the roads, as soon as you enter Kherson from Crimea, the roads become like modern American highways. The Russian government has you know, made every effort to improve the infrastructure. Homes are being rebuilt, gas lines are being reestablished, water lines are being established, the basic infrastructure, schools, hospitals, you know, the basic fundamental elements of government that allow pensions to be paid, you know, roads to be maintained. All of this is put in by the Russian government during wartime. So, you know, while the fighting's taking place at the front, behind them, the Russian government is pushing in and doing this reconstruction. Let there be no doubt that the Russian government is winning. I mean, the Russian army is winning. The Ukrainians are on their last legs. But as I remind people, the bloodiest month of World War II for American forces wasn't June D-Day, wasn't December 44 Battle of the Bulge. It was April 1945, after everybody knew that Nazi Germany had been defeated. That was the bloodiest month because the Nazis fought hardest. The Ukrainians are fighting hard right now. I spoke to soldiers from a unit that suffered 3,000 dead leading assaults in the Advika area. And I said, my God, you got slaughtered. And they said, no, we killed 20,000 of them. And today the death rate's even greater. I mean, the Russians are losing thousands of men killed, but they're slaughtering the Ukrainians, and it's an unsustainable casualty rate for the Ukrainians. They're desperate. They're running out of ammunition, and you're going to see increasingly as the Russians push forward. But the Russians aren't in the business of conquering territory irresponsibly. They will recapture the totality of Donetsk. Right now, about 33% of Donetsk Oblast, or the Republic, is under Ukrainian occupation. There's a percentage of Kherson and Zaporizhia likewise under a Ukrainian occupation. But the Russians are going to take that, and they may take more territory, but they're going to do it in a manner that succeeds in their objective, their stated objective of destroying the Ukrainian military, and they're
Right.
not going to allow unnecessary casualties on their part. So this isn't performance art. This isn't theatrics. This is the hard, cold business of winning a war. It's about killing the Ukrainians in numbers that the Ukrainians can't sustain, and that's what's happening as we speak.
So the Russian military is attempting to kill the remains of the Ukrainian military, and the Ukrainian military is attempting to kill civilians in these areas. Do I have that correct?
You have it correct. First of all, let me just make a clear point. The Russian military isn't attempting to kill Ukrainians. They're slaughtering Ukrainians.
Okay,
They're
I
murdering
appreciate that.
Ukrainians.
I
They're
appreciate that
wiping them off the map.
Right.
And the Ukrainians, in their desperation, are attacking Russian civilians because their only hope right now is to draw the West into this conflict. And so
Right.
they're attacking Russian civilians, both in the new territories, and the city of Donetsk, which has been shelled mercilessly for 10 years, in Lugansk, in Zaporizhia, in Kherson, but also they're attacking the Crimea, and they're attacking Russian cities, Belgorod, they're attacking the Voronezh area, and they're not attacking military targets. They're using cluster munitions against civilian targets where there's no military. They know what they're hitting is civilian related. They're hitting parks, they're hitting schools, they're hitting hospitals, they're hitting markets.
Well,
and the
what do
sole
they hope
purpose-
to gain by this, unless it's just some last act of desperation, some final thrashing out at the adversary?
They want a Russian overreaction. They want Vladimir Putin and Shoigu to get angry and to lash out and do some harsh act, act of retaliation against Ukrainian civilians that the Ukrainians could then say, aha, look what the Russians have done, and bring the
Right.
West in. But the Russians aren't taking the bait. There
it.
will be justice. The justice will be dealt out when Russia wins this war and brings it to an end. But Russia's not taking the bait. They are comfortable with the trajectory that they're on right now. And everybody I spoke to says that they anticipate that the final victory will be sometime this year.
Alexander, we had a guest on this week who's a former colleague of mine from Fox News. You may know of this gentleman, Bill O'Reilly. And Mr. O'Reilly argued that the Russian economy is in shambles due to the war and due to the sanctions. Is this true?
Александр, на этой неделе у меня в эфире был гость, мой бывший коллега с Fox News, возможно, вы знаете, Билл О'Рейли. Так вот, он утверждал, что российская экономика сейчас в очень плохом состоянии, в руинах, можно сказать, из-за войны, в частности. Вот так ли это?
Судья, я думаю, что его нужно отправить...
Forgive me for asking this question. I know it's absurd, but I must have you refute what he said.
Извините, что задаю этот вопрос. Я понимаю всю его абсурдность, но все же хотелось бы от вас услышать, чтобы вы опровергли то, что он сказал.
Я думаю, что ему стоит приехать в Россию, чтобы посмотреть все своими глазами. Я не знаю, на основании чего он делает такие заявления. А в связи с этим мне еще вспоминается президент США Барак Обама, который однажды заявил, что он порвал экономику в России в клочья, и теперь это только бензоколонка.
Well, he should come to Russia and see with his own eyes. I don't know what makes him make such statements. This also brings to my mind the statements by President Obama previously when he said that the Russian economy is torn to pieces and Russia is nothing but a gas station economy.
Рвут всю нашу экономику, никак порвать не могут до конца.
Okay, so they have been tearing the economy down to pieces, but they still haven't succeeded yet.
Я приглашаю этого журналиста к нам в Россию, я ему покажу нашу экономику, наши предприятия, которые сейчас строятся очень активно, магазины, ну, все, что хочет, то и покажем. Пусть он убедится, что мы неплохо себя чувствуем.
I would like to invite this journalist to visit Russia, and I will personally take him around and show him our economy, show him our plants and companies that are being built. I will show him the shopping malls, and I will show him around. He will be able to see for himself that it's not so.
Judge, let me just point out that Alexander Zuryanov is responsible for the economic development of Novosibirsk region. It's the third largest city in Russia after St. Petersburg and Moscow. And it has the largest developing economy. And it's succeeding because of people like Alexander Zuryanov, people who know the Russian economy. They know the world economy better than Bill O'Reilly apparently does. And they know how to survive, and not just survive, but to thrive in the environment of sanctions. We've joked about this before, and I think Alexander will agree with me. It is a statement that people make, and I've heard it many times on this trip. Thank you, Joe Biden. Thank you, Joe Biden, because of the sanctions, Russia has actually become much stronger than it would have been had there not been sanctions.